people that father-daughter team, investing in the youth when the system ain't treating them equal. Providing truth for our people, we able to reach them. So anytime you get accused for a crime and Lord knows you ain't do it, we here to get you through it. Exemplifying prudence and glorifying God, making sure you're compensated for other people's doings. Our vision is to be one of the best. We're small enough to focus on your matter throughout the neighborhoods of Dallas. Working constantly and making sure your rights are protected. A firm team of lawyers, aggressive, effective. A team that has your back in the courtroom. Two well-spoken black lawyers in the courtroom. Investing time and resources when it's evident that you were treated wrong. Now you walking out of Dallas courtroom with a settlement. Corbin and Corbett, the father-daughter legal tag team that has your back in the courtroom. Our purpose is simple. To obtain the favorable outcome for each client and glorify Christ in all we do. Our vision is to be one of the best and most...
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. I'm sure by now we have all heard the guilty verdict in all three of the cases, all three of the charges that Derek Chauvin faced. A unanimous jury found him guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, as well as manslaughter. And so he's facing considerable time. And so, you know, we're celebrating. As African Americans, we're celebrating. But I want to just remind you of a couple of things before we, you know, just do all the celebrating and then, you know, go back and say, hey, we got justice and so on. I want to remind you of a few things. But before I do, ironically, I am a committed Christ follower. I do have the love of God in me. I have the compassion of God in me. And I get no pleasure out of seeing Derek Chauvin, you know, being found guilty and now facing many, many, many years in prison. I don't celebrate another person's fall like that. I don't think that's the spirit of Christ. The Bible tells us to love our enemies, to pray for those who despitefully use us, to bless those who hate us. That is what Christ told us to do. So I actually feel some compassion, some pity and mercy for Derek Chauvin and his family. Justice was done, but I don't relish in that. I wish that he would have done what so many of us could see, but apparently he couldn't see. And that is, you know, back up, take a deep breath. This is not worth all of this. Over a $20 alleged fake $20 bill. It's not worth doing this, you know, and I'm sure he feels that, you know, if he had the chance to do it again, he would back up, take a deep breath and let George live and probably just let him go, you know, write him a ticket or something. And it would not have cost all this pain and turmoil for him and his family, for the Floyd family, for America, for people around the world. So I don't celebrate in his bad fortune. I celebrate justice, but not what happened to him. And that's because I'm just a Christian. I'm a believer. I am a compassionate person. Now, what I really want to tell you, though, is I want to tell you that the work that we have to do is far from over. It is far from over. The work is far from over. Maybe George Floyd's vindicated murder can help us move the ball, help us move the needle, but it's far from over. And I want to be specific about what yet needs to be done before we can really exhale. Don't exhale yet. Yeah, I know everyone, not everyone, but I'm sure most in the black community are elated that Justice has been served in this case. However, the work is far from over. And I want to be very specific in what I'm talking about. What we need more than just a guilty verdict in a case that was obviously a guilty case. We need reform. We shouldn't even have to get to this point. In other words, the facts shouldn't have to be so overwhelming before we can get justice. I mean, that alone tells you how much we need reform in policing of the black community. Despite all that we saw in the video, despite what we saw, most of us were still very, very skeptical as to whether or not the Floyd family would get justice in this case. Because again, we know how tilted the system is toward policing, toward police officers. And that's why we cannot take a collective, we can't exhale collectively yet. There's still a lot of work that must be done. And here are some things that I want to call your attention to. Here's some things right here. All right. So number one, we cannot really exhale until the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act has been enacted. We need that bill to become a law. We need Congress to enact the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It is critical. Then we will see national police reform. Until that happens, what happened, the guilty verdict in Minneapolis is just in that jurisdiction. And it's for one person who was lynched, in my opinion. But what happened there will not reverberate to the other 18,000 or so police departments in America. That's why we need a change on the national level. We have gotten guilty verdicts here in Dallas. We have seen 2 convictions of police officers here for killing black men in the Jordan Edwards case and the Botham Jean case. But that doesn't mean, that didn't stop Derek Chauvin from doing what he did. That didn't stop the Chicago police officer from killing that Hispanic kid. Because that is just a small victory here in this jurisdiction. We need reform across the nation. And the way we get that is by helping, pushing, motivating, prodding Congress to enact the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Now, one of the things that it does, one of the principal things that it does is it will seriously gut qualified immunity for police officers. It will, across the nation, abolish qualified immunity. Now, some jurisdictions have already rolled back qualified immunity for their police officers in specific jurisdictions. But that's just that jurisdiction. What happened in that jurisdiction may not impact. It will not impact what happens across the nation. But if the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is enacted, if Congress enacts it and Joe Biden signs it into law, then that will have national import. Qualified immunity will be abolished across the nation. Now, what is qualified immunity? Qualified immunity, the word immunity is the operative word. Immunity means that police officers are immune in civil court. So you file a lawsuit against a police officer who has killed someone under color of law as a police officer, and you sue them, you take them to civil court. In all actuality, the case is going to be thrown out pursuant to qualified immunity. Immunity means they are protected. Now, the word qualified means it's not an absolute immunity, meaning you can sue them, but in the overwhelming majority of the cases, they are thrown out, all right, because they have that immunity. So that means that they know 9.5 times out of 10, they're not going to suffer any sort of civil liability. They're not going to get they're not going to have to come out of their pockets. They're not going to be at jeopardy of suffering any kind of financial blow from killing someone. Even as grotesque and ugly of a murder that we saw with George Floyd, they know most likely the case is going to get kicked out. So there's no incentive for them to do any better. That's why qualified immunity must be abolished. And that is why the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act must be enacted. Then we can breathe a collective sigh of relief. Go ahead and celebrate now justice for George, justice for his brothers and his family, and for the African American community, because a terrible, horrible message would have been sent from anything less than a guilty verdict. But that doesn't mean we can now go back to our corners and say the fight is over. The fight's not over. The fight is far from over. We just got one small little victory that has no impact on most of the police departments around this country. The only way to impact them, to affect them, to change their behavior is the passing of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Listen, in this country, if you want to change people's behavior, you got to change the law. That doesn't mean you're going to change their hearts. And we don't care about changing hearts. I care about changing hearts as a preacher, as a minister of the gospel. I'm all about changing hearts. But as a black man in America, I'm not waiting till someone's heart's changed. I want the law changed so they will change their conduct and behavior. You follow me? And in this country, when the law is changed, when qualified immunity is abolished, and police officers know they are no longer above the law, that will begin to change their conduct and begin to change their behavior. And they will not feel bold enough to choke the life out of somebody on the street corner while 15 or 20 folks are filming them on cell phones. Because they will know, I could lose my house, I could lose my pension, I could lose my savings, I can lose my investments, all of that, because I no longer have this immunity. That is the way we fight this. And that's when we're going to see real reform. So celebrate, but we got to get right back to work. I say it this way: celebrate the progress, but continue the protest. Celebrate the progress, but continue the protest. Now, what else? Not only qualified immunity, but there's a U.S. Supreme Court case that also the U.S. Supreme Court needs to overturn. It is the Graham v. Connor case. It is a case that police training academies, they teach police officers the holding, the verbiage, the ruling, the words, the sentences in this case. This case endangers black people. The holding in the Graham v. Connor case has resulted in the death of a lot of black people, because it is the one that protects police officers in criminal court. Qualified immunity protects them in civil court. Graham v. Connor protects them in criminal court. And it is the reason why prosecutors oftentimes will not even bring charges against police officers, because they know they're going to run up against the language in Graham v. Connor, which says things like police officers make split-second decisions. You can't second-guess police officers. You got to look at the use of force from this reasonable, objective, reasonable standard. You got to look at it from the perspective of the police officer. And all of that type of language gives them basically carte blanche power and authority on the streets to do almost anything, because they're going to do it just like they did in this trial. They had that use of force expert, I think his last name was Broad, who got up there, and based on the Graham v. Connor case, they explicitly discussed the case while he testified. And pursuant to that case, he said that what Derek Chauvin did was reasonable and that it was not illegal, therefore, that use of force, holding his knee on George Floyd's neck like that, all because of the holding in the Graham v. Connor case. We need that case overturned. That case has been disastrous for Black Americans. It protects police officers, again, in criminal court. And so prosecutors, not only because of their racial bias, tend not to even want to bring charges, but they get in those grand jury rooms, talk to the grand jury about Graham v. Connor, and the grand jury in most cases don't indict them. And then if for some chance we get an indictment, the case is going to be dismissed, or the jury is going to rule in their favor, all because of Graham v. Connor. This is not even complicated as to why police officers have gotten away with murdering so many black people. They are protected. They are protected by qualified immunity, and they are protected by a case called Graham v. Connor. Let me put it up again. Write it down. Read it. Study it. Get to know it. It's important. It is critical important. And the last thing I want to say is I want to give a special thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement. I do. I know they got issues. I know that they embrace things, the movement itself, the organization, let me put it that way. The organization embrace things that I, as a Christian, I don't embrace. Okay? I just don't. But I separate the intent and the goal of the BLM movement from the organization. And I want to give a special thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement. They have kept this thing in the streets. They have kept it on the front burner. They have kept it on the minds of the politicians. They have been, without them, it wasn't the old school mainline civil rights organizations. It wasn't in other words, it wasn't the NAACP. It wasn't the Urban League. It wasn't those organizations. It was those young people through the BLM movement that is pushing police reform. So I thank them, although I do not agree with all that they talk about in their mission statement, quite frankly. But again, I think BLM, Black Lives Matter, what a powerful slogan that is. Just to remind this country, Black lives matter. Our lives matter. George Floyd's life matter. Dante Wright's life mattered. Eric Garner's life mattered. Trayvon Martin's life mattered. Philando Castile's life mattered. Jordan Edwards' life mattered. Bolton John's life mattered. My life mattered. My son's life mattered. We as black men, our lives matter. Are you with me? Tatiana Edwards here in Fort Worth, her life mattered. Breonna Taylor, her life mattered. I come to tears when I have the fact that we even have to say this. Why should we even have to say it? We're made in the image of God. God made us, and we're not cursed. We're not cursed. We're not inferior. We're not subhuman. We're not second-class citizens. Our lives matter. And I appreciate the Black Lives Matter movement for reminding America of that and insisting on it, no matter what white politicians, conservative politicians say, no matter what black conservatives say, who cares? The point is getting across. The point is being made across America that Black Lives Matter. And I think that organization, not for all that they stand for, but the fact that they have put the main thing on the front burner and they've kept it there. So again, shout out to BLM. So remember, yes, celebrate justice for the Floyd family, but remember, the fight is far, far, far from over. I can almost assure you, until these things are done, we're going to hear about another story. With just as sure as I sit here, somebody police may be choking somebody out right now, may be shooting an unarmed black man right now, despite the George Floyd justice here, despite Derek Chauvin being found guilty, because they know they still got qualified immunity. They still got the Graham v. Connor case that they can depend on. And they know the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has not been enacted. And if it's left up to the GOP Congress, it will not be acted. It will not be enacted. Are you with me? They know they got their troops in Congress who's going to fight the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. But we got to keep the fight. We got to keep pushing. We got to keep protesting. We got to keep praying. We got to keep, putting pressure on Joe Biden, on our members of Congress. Eventually, I think they're going to have to just go ahead and do away with the filibuster so that they don't need 10 Republicans, because they're not going to get them. We're not going to get 10 Republicans to enact the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They're not with us. They're not for us. Not when it comes to racial justice. They're not for that. And some of them are so radical and so out there and just mean-spirited. They're not going to lift a finger to do anything that benefits the black community. That's the way it is. So we got to keep pushing. And I believe God is with us. As a preacher, as a minister of the gospel, I believe God is with us. I believe God is visiting the issue of justice. I believe like God was with Frederick Douglass and the abolitionists, white and black abolitionists during slavery, as he was with Dr. King and the civil rights movement. I believe he's with us now. I believe he's championing justice. The Bible is full of justice. It is full of it. And I believe God is with us. He's a God of justice. He's Jehovah Sabaoth. Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord, the God of justice. And he is with us. Praise God. Amen. Didn't mean to start preaching, but I am a preacher and a lawyer. Okay? So yes, celebrate this, but there's so much more work to be done. All right. Very good. I'm out of here. See some folks have made some comments. Thank you for those comments. So I'm out. God bless you. Y'all have a good one.